Alexandria Gazette, July 28, 1914. Austrian troops take Belgrade. Serbians make no attempt to defend capital, but march out. Prospects for peace. England asks Vienna to submit grievances to Conference of European Powers. Washington, July 28. Word reaches the Austrian embassy in Paris that 2 Army Corps of Austrian troops crossed the Danube into Serbian territory last night and today occupied Belgrade, meeting with no resistance. Unofficial reports in Berlin, London, and Paris declare a detachment of Austrians invaded Serbia at Mitrovica, 50 miles northwest of Belgrade. The Serbians, it is stated, withdrew before the advance of the Austrians. Unconfirmed reports declared it was announced in Vienna that hostilities were opened at daybreak today. Although acts of war between Austria and Serbia have occurred, powerful influences are at work in Europe to prevent further hostilities. They have, at least, gained a day, and hope of success has consequently grown. Great Britain and Russia are taking the leadership in the peace plans. The Tsar's government, warning Austria that she must not invade Serbia, is pressing on that empire a diplomatic formula under which Serbia would give assurances to Austria that would not violate her national sovereignty and which Austria would be able to accept without appearing to back down. St. Petersburg's belief seems to be that Russia's prompt and unmistakable attitude has brought Austria to her senses, and it is said that the Austrian ambassador in St. Petersburg is trying to remove the bad impression caused by the ultimatum, declaring that it was not an ultimatum but only a note verbale. The usual friendly relations between St. Petersburg and Berlin are undisturbed. The military preparations of Russia continue, however, unabated. All news on the continent is being strictly censored, and practically nothing concerning military movements gets through. Great Britain has asked Austria to assent to the mediation of disinterested powers and submit her grievances to a conference. In this, she is backed by France and Italy. Germany has been asked to join in this effort, but has declined to interfere with her ally. Great Britain and France also are endeavoring to obtain an agreement to prevent a European war in case Austria insists on disciplining Serbia. Late dispatches indicate that neither Austria, Russia, or Germany has yet shown a disposition to give guarantees. The official German attitude, toward the proposed mediation is unhopeful. Germany offers only partial acceptance. She accepts the principle of mediation between Vienna and St. Petersburg, but not between Vienna and Belgrade. Her effort will be to localize the conflict between Austria and Serbia. German official circles insist that no action likely to hamper Austrian plans has the least chance of success, and the next developments depend upon Russia. Greece will help Serbia, Constantinople, July 28th. The Greek minister here declares that in the event of war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, Greece would be compelled to dispatch 100,000 troops to the assistance of Serbia.
Imperial Valley Press, July 28, 1914. Europe stands on brink of greatest modern war. London, July 28. Despite the fact that war has not been declared between Serbia and Austria, and British statesmen insist they still hope for peace, or at least a localized struggle, shots have been fired across European borders and by a nation not directly involved as yet in the present trouble. Russian Cossacks are reported to have fired upon a party of German officers near Eikkonen, giving as their reason that the Germans attempted to cross the border at the wrong place, and further asserting they did not know they were officers. The result is that feeling is running high throughout Germany, the ally of Austria, against the Russians, who, of course, as Serbian allies, are held responsible for the present attitude of the latter country. Other reports are that Serbian troops have fired across the Save at Austrian troops, who returned the fire, and that bridges at points where Austrian troops were expected to be thrown into Serbia have been dynamited. Italy, the third member of the Triple Alliance, has announced she will remain friendly to Austria, and Greece has admitted that in the case of real war she will be compelled to send 100,000 of her troops to the Serbian colors. The situation is critical. The fate of Europe hangs in the balance, and the slightest spark may set off the war powder before peaceably inclined agents can cope with it. If there is a war, it will be tremendous, such a one as the world never saw before. The Kaiser has signified since his arrival on a fast destroyer at Kier his intention of doing all he can in joining Britain to endeavor to bring about peace, but the popular feeling of his citizens may grew beyond him. Calm observers declare that they cannot see in the reply of Serbia to the Austrian ultimatum a demand for immediate war. Practically every point was conceded, save that for immediate action. Here are a few of the day's developments. Train service in Russia and Austria is practically abandoned, save for military movements, the governments having taken them over. No freight, and few passengers are being moved. Americans in Austria are trying frantically to reach Berlin in order to get out of the danger zone. All Europe prepares. New York, July 28th. Berlin declares that Russia has formally declared that she has not yet begun mobilization, but messages are so censored that it is impossible not to see in interrupted train service the needs of the military. An official statement given out in Vienna declares the Serbian note is false, in that it attempts to create an impression of yielding while refusing to do so. Paris reports that officials there do not see much hope in the situation. In Berlin, demonstrations on the streets and in the parks are continued, and hooks for Germany, Austria, and the Kaiser are heard on every hand. Reports from Hungary say that Serbian troops on a steamer on the Danube, near Thames Cubin, have fired on Austrian troops. The Austrians returned the fire, and an engagement of some importance ensued. It is considered probable that this is another version of an encounter yesterday. Opinion at the Foreign Office, while reflecting tension and alarm, inclines to the view that Serbia's reply to Austria would make war impossible. Less at peace is Foreign Minister Gray's call to governments of Europe. Yet, said an official in Downing Street to the correspondent, "We are not on our knees. If it turns out that Austria's brusque move is a prelude to an assault on the Triple Entente, Britain will unsheath the sword that has rested in its scabbard since the fall of Napoleon. For 100 years, though we have known many excursions and alarms, we have held aloof from all European wars except the insignificant affair in the Crimea. Diplomatically, however, we have been almost incessantly busy over continental crises."
Atumwa Tri-Weekly Courier, July 28, 1914. Austrians contend the Serbians are dodging issue while pretending to make concessions asked for an ultimatum, Europe on war footing. Official statement is given out by Foreign Office on communication. Claim dishonesty is clearly shown. Reply to demand of dual monarchy not looked on as satisfactory. London, July 27th. Lack of confirmation of the early report of a hostile encounter on the Danube between Serbian and Austrian troops and Sir Edward Grey's efforts to obtain the consent of the leading European nations to mediation led to a belief today in the possibility of avoiding armed conflict between the European nations. Germany and Italy were said to have agreed to the principle of the British Foreign Secretary's proposal of a conference between the ambassadors in London of the leading powers. Vienna, July 27th. A communication issued by the Austro-Hungarian Foreign Office today sets forth the Austrian view of the Serbian reply to Austria's note demanding the cessation of the pan-Serbian agitation and the punishment of those concerned in the assassination at Sarajevo of Archduke Francis Ferdinand and his consort. The communication also gives the reasons for Austria's dissatisfaction with Serbia's reply. It follows: the object of the Serbian note is to create the false impression that the Serbian government is prepared in great measure to comply with our demands. As a matter of fact, however, Serbia's note is filled with a spirit of dishonesty which clearly lets it be seen that the Serbian government is not seriously determined to put an end to the culpable tolerance it hitherto has extended to intrigues against the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. The Serbian note contains such far-reaching reservations and limitations, not only regarding the general principles of our action, but also in regard to the individual claims we have put forward, that the concessions actually made by Serbia become insignificant. In particular, our demand for partition of the Austria-Hungarian authorities in investigations to detect accomplices in the conspiracy on Serbian territory has been rejected, while our request that measures be taken against that section of the Serbian press hostile to Austria-Hungary has been declined, and our wish that the Serbian government take the necessary measures to prevent the dissolved Austrophobe associations continuing their activity under another name and under another form has not been considered. Since the claims in the Austro-Hungary note of July 23 regard being had to the attitude hitherto adopted by Serbia, represent the minimum of what is necessary for the establishment of permanent peace with the southeastern monarchy, the Serbian answer must be regarded as unsatisfactory. That the Serbian government itself is conscious that its note is not acceptable to us is proved by the circumstances that it proposes at the end not to extend the dispute to arbitration, an invitation which is thrown into its proper light by the fact that 3 hours before handing in the note, a few minutes before the expiration of the time limit, the mobilization of the Serbians took place. It was pointed out here today that Austria-Hungary, being a signatory to the Second Hague Convention, would be obliged formally to declare war, but as Serbia did not sign that convention, such a declaration might perhaps be regarded as unnecessary in this instance. Shots are exchanged. Reports from Hungary state that Serbian troops on board a steamer on the Danube near Thames-Cuban have fired on Austrian troops. The Austrians returned the fire, and an engagement of importance ensued. It is considered probable that this is another version of yesterday's encounter. According to yesterday's version, the encounter occurred near Semendria, 24 miles southeast of Belgrade, where vessels conveying Austrian infantry were said to have been fired on by the Serbian side of the Danube and to have returned the fire. Navy men make plan. Toulon, July 27th. Vice Admiral Augustin Bouy de Lapierre, Commander-in-Chief of the French Navy, today called a council of the commanders of the various divisions on board the battleship Courbet to consider the measure to be taken in the advent of the ordering of the mobilization of the French Navy. United States to remain neutral in event of war. Washington, D.C., July 27th. The gravity of the European situation was reflected in an official dispatch from St. Petersburg today, saying the Russian Minister of War had said he considered war between Russia and Austria almost inevitable. This statement was made after the Russian ministry had issued an official declaration that Russia was greatly disturbed and could not remain indifferent in the crisis that had arisen between Serbia and Austro-Hungary. The order for the complete mobilization of the Russian army was confirmed. President Wilson said today, in answer to inquiries whether the United States would try to bring about peace in Europe, that he had not considered the subject, but that the traditional policy of the United States was not to mix in an European affair. He intimated that in the present crisis the United States could do nothing. Strikers are patriotic. Russian workmen return to jobs to show approval of government's Serbian attitude. St. Petersburg, July 27th. The workmen in the Russian capital, who had been on strike for a week today, decided to resume work in order to emphasize their approval of the Russian government's support of Serbia. They made patriotic demonstrations in the streets and sang the Russian national anthem. Greeks to aid Serbs. Army of 100,000 men will be sent to fight Austrians in case war is declared. Constantinople, July 27th. The Greek minister here today declared that in the event of war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, Greece would be compelled to dispatch 100,000 troops to the assistance of Serbia. Holland plans to remain neutral. The Hague, July 27th. The Chief of the General Staff of the Dutch Army and the Minister of Marine decided today to cut short their holiday and return to the capital, where active steps are being taken by the authorities for the maintenance of Holland's neutrality in the event of war. Sir Edward Grey, England, is working heroically to preserve the peace, offers mediation as only solution. German ruler believed to hold the key to the present situation. London, July 27th. Glimmers of hope flickered in the darkened sky of European politics today, and the wish was general that the efforts of the great European powers to avert a clash of arms, which might involve many nations, would be successful. While all the powers were preparing for possible eventualities, their statesmen, with Sir Edward Grey, the British Foreign Secretary, at their head, were endeavoring to bring together the governments at issue with a view to mediation. At the Serbian legation in London, the view was held that some improvement had taken place in the situation, and this was attributed to the influence exercised by Russia. Alex Georgievich, the secretary, said, "We have complied with everything that does not impair our sovereign rights. We hope that Austria-Hungary, in the interest of peace, will recognize that consideration is due to an independent state and so avert war. If, however, Austria-Hungary wants war, she will see that we are prepared to accept it in the interests of the dignity of our state." The fact that Austrian ambassadors aboard were willing to discuss the controversial points with foreign governments, and especially with Russia, led to the belief that an outlet for the deadlock would be found. The stock markets of London and European capitals still displayed a panicky feeling, although it was not as pronounced as on Saturday. Germans are calm. Berlin, July 27th. Emperor William, who arrived at Kiel today on board the imperial yacht Hohenzollern, proceeded at once to Potsdam. A large crowd gathered at the Kiel station, and as His Majesty departed, the people cheered and sang patriotic songs. The German Crown Prince arrives at Potsdam tonight to join the other members of the imperial family. The military element in Germany calmly awaits the outcome of the international crisis. It is stated that no orders have been issued to the army in this connection, and that the customary furloughs to a proportion of the soldiers, in order that they might help in the field work at their homes during the harvest, have not been interrupted. One of the newspapers prints the statement that the German High Sea Fleet had been ordered to concentrate in home waters, but the German Admiralty says no such instructions have been issued, and that the ships will remain in Norwegian waters for the present. The general public in Berlin takes a somewhat calmer view of the situation as time passes, without the occurrence of the dreaded catastrophe of armed conflict, and on reports of the proposed mediation of the powers between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. The German Foreign Office, as yet, however, professes to be without any information as to any steps being taken by the mediatory powers either at Vienna or St. Petersburg. Officials declare that no word has come from St. Petersburg regarding the Russian attitude, but hopes are still expected that Russia will abstain from taking any steps which might precipitate a general conflict in Europe. Encourage mediation. Rome, July 27th. Marquis di San Giuliano, Italian foreign minister, and the British ambassador to Italy, today called on the Austro-Hungarian ambassador to discuss means of conciliation between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. They had previously informed the Austro-Hungarian diplomats of their intended visit, and he had replied that, while he would receive them with pleasure, the Austro-Hungarian government reserved all its rights to take any military measures it deemed necessary. Harbors are mined. London, July 27th. A special newspaper dispatch from Copenhagen says several of the Russian harbors on the Baltic Sea have been mined. Minister leaves. Vienna, July 27th. M. Jovanovic, Serbian minister to Austria-Hungary, left for Fort Belgrade.
The Sun, July 29, 1914. Austria declares war in reply to British move. Russia will take the field if Serbia is invaded. Efforts in all capitals to avoid big conflict. Commanders of the opposing armies. General Putnik, Serbian Chief of Staff, and Baron von Hotzendorf, Austrian Chief of Staff, are the men actively directing the campaigns. The Crown Prince and Archduke are nominally commanders-in-chief of the two forces. Crown Prince Alexander of Serbia. General Putnik. Archduke Frederick of Austria. Baron Conrad of Hotzendorf. Austrian sees Serb ships, blockade Montenegrin port, Serbian army in Novi Bazar. Germany eager to curb Russia, but will not stay Allies' hand. Russia mobilizing 14 Army Corps on German border, makes of Europe hard hit, weak in U.S. goes soaring. Austria's formal declaration of war against Serbia, say London dispatches, cannot be said to have disappointed expectations, although it shattered some over-sanguine hopes. Rumors of the occupation of Belgrade and the invasion of Serbia via Mitrovica are not confirmed, but official confirmation has been received of the seizure of Serbian ships on the Danube. St. Petersburg dispatches say it is known that the moment the Austrians cross the Serb frontier, the Russian mobilization orders will be published and Russia will take the field. Germany has notified Russia, it is reported, that if the Tsar's forces mobilize, Germany will immediately follow suit. Russia now has 14 Army Corps near the Austrian frontier. Austrian warships have blockaded the Montenegrin port of Antivari. The Montenegrin and Serbian troops are said to be concentrating in Novi Bazar, on the Austrian frontier. There is an unconfirmed rumor in London that the German minister in Belgrade has been assassinated. Previous telegrams said he had accompanied the other foreign envoys to Niš. Germany's and Austria's courteous rejection of Sir Edward Grey's efforts to prevent an international struggle has banished the idea of an ambassadorial conference, but this has been superseded by direct negotiations at St. Petersburg between Russia and Austria. Great Britain, while abstaining from anything which would be provocative of alarm on the part of Austria and her friends, is quietly making preparations for any contingency that may bring her within the scope of the continental troubles. There is great activity at the War Office and the Admiralty. Leaves of absence have been stopped at the dockyards and the fleets are assembling at strategic positions. A patrol flotilla of destroyers has been sent to various war stations and squadrons in distant waters are concentrating and coaling. All these are purely defensive preparations. Serious anti-war rioting on the part of the socialists occurred in Berlin, crowds on Unter den Linden shouting, "Down with war." Police with drawn swords charged the crowds and dispersed them. Pessimism prevails in Paris as to the outlook for peace. The boulevards were alive with people shouting "Abaisse la guerre." The socialists played an active role in the day's developments. The London markets were partly demoralized yesterday by news of the menacing situation on the continent and the troubles in Ireland. A flood of selling orders from the continent helped to depress prices. The tendency on the Paris bourse was downward. The commercial exchange decided to suspend all trading in futures in grains, sugars, and all commodities in bulk until the international situation improves. Markets in Berlin opened weak and grew weaker during the day. The Montreal and Toronto stock exchanges were closed, following sharp breaks in prices. The news from Europe caused wheat to advance sharply in Chicago and St. Louis, and the wildest excitement prevailed in both exchanges. Russia to mobilize when Austria enters Serbia. Special cable dispatch to the Sun, London, July 29. The St. Petersburg correspondent of the Morning Post says that he is in a position to state positively that the moment the Austrians cross the Serbian frontier, Russian mobilization orders will be published and Russia will take the field with all the consequences involved in such action. The correspondent adds, as a matter of fact, Russia took preliminary steps at mobilization the moment the Council of Ministers decided, on July 24, that Serbia's sovereign status must be protected at all costs. The Daily Express gives prominence to an unconfirmable rumor that Baron von Griesinger, the German minister at Belgrade, has been assassinated. Recent telegrams said that the minister, accompanied by other foreign envoys, went to Niš Saturday. The Berlin Lokalanzeiger, according to a dispatch from Berlin, has a telegram from Semlin denying the report of the assassination. The Daily Chronicle says Germany has clearly notified Russia that if she even partially mobilizes, Germany will immediately mobilize. Germany willing to curb Russia, but not Austria. Special cable dispatch to the Sun, Berlin, July 28. A declaration of war was Austria's answer to the proposal of Sir Edward Grey for an ambassadorial conference in London on the troubles between Austria and Serbia. Austria's formal action came soon after Germany had rejected the proposal, which was the first result of the Kaiser's return from his Norwegian trip and his entrance into the international arena. The action of Germany emphasized the fact that she will support Austria to the fullest extent. In Berlin, the intervention of Sir Edward Grey, and so far as it affects Austria and Serbia, is regarded as a complete failure. The Kaiser's refusal to restrain Austria makes the impression stronger that the action of Austria was taken with his knowledge and consent. This was clearly and succinctly stated by a personage in close touch with the
Wilmar Tribune, July 29, 1914. Austria declares war with Serbia. General European war will follow if Russia draws sword to save Balkan states. Italian soldiers. Russian Cossacks. German infantry. British artillery. French infantry. Austria's ultimatum. The Austrian ultimatum to Serbia contained the following demands. First, the Serbian government must publish official disavowal of its connection with anti-Austrian propaganda. Second, the Serbian government must make a vigorous investigation of the part played by Slavs in the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand, heir to the Austrian throne, and his wife. Third, Serbia must suppress all the pan-Slavic societies which are carrying on a political campaign against Austria. Fourth, Serbia must suppress the activities of Slavic agents in Bosnia and Herzegovina who are working for the detachment of territory from Austria. With tense interest, the whole world is watching the development of the situation between Austria and Serbia. What shall be its immediate result? What its final outcome? Although Serbia backed down on July 25th, will this quarrel between neighbors extend beyond its original territory and eventually involve all the great powers of Europe in a general war? That Austria would be supported by Germany should Russia decide upon hostile measures in support of Serbia was considered absolutely certain. Both Austria and Germany are next-door neighbors of Russia and are united in the common interest of preventing Slav expansion and aggression in the Balkan Peninsula. Whether Italy, the third power in the Triple Alliance, would actively support Austria was a question open to speculation. It is true that the terms of the alliance make it practically obligatory for Italy to lend its support to Austria and Germany in the event of a war with Russia, but it is believed by many that owing to Italy's close relations to Montenegro, which is outspokenly friendly to Russia, and in view of certain internal conditions, Italy may remain neutral. Whether England and France, the other great Western powers, would eventually side with Russia was a question of deep concern to all Europe. France, being a rather close ally of Russia and naturally hostile to Germany, may consider this a welcome opportunity to seek redress from its hereditary foe for the taking away of Alsace-Lorraine in 1870 to 1871 and may enter into the general mix-up with that end in view. Attitude of minor powers. That an outbreak of hostilities between Austria and Serbia may arouse a sympathetic wave among the belligerent and intensely clannish peoples of the Balkan Peninsula is extremely likely. Montenegro has already announced that it will give its support to Serbia, and this may prompt the other minor powers of the Balkans to take sides in accordance with their racial, religious, and political interests. Romania, at one time a stanch ally of Russia, is no longer friendly to that power, at least not to the extent of fighting for it. It is believed that Romania will remain neutral in the fight and will carefully guard its territory against encroachments by either of the hostile powers. Only in the event that Bulgaria should decide upon giving active support to Austria is it believed that Romania would abandon its neutrality and attack Bulgaria. Turkey, Greece, and the other Eastern powers of Europe may not be drawn into the conflict in the beginning, but in view of the intense feeling of racial jealousy and hatred between the Mohammedan and the Christian elements struggling for supremacy in that part of Europe, it is doubtful that they will remain neutral through the entire conflict. The strength of the armies. Germany, with 316 ships in her navy and an estimated war strength of land forces amounting to 2,250,000 men, leads the nations involved in military power. Russia is next, with 166 ships and an estimated fighting force of 1,845,000 men. Austria has 114 ships and can probably put 1,500,000 men in the field if necessary. Of the sea fighters, Germany has 33 battleships to Russia's 9 and Austria's 13, 103 torpedo boats of all classes to Russia's 203 and Austria's 72, 23 submarines to Russia's 20 and Austria's 6. The rest of the naval strength is confined to cruisers, eliminating the non-fighting craft in the three navies. Russia's standing army in peace is not much less in numbers than her war strength, being 1,500,000 men. Germany supports 672,000 men in her army at all times. Austria has 425,881 and Serbia 30,038. All require continuous military service, Russia's demands being the greatest, with a term of from 3 to 4 1/3 years. During the last few years, Russia's entire army has been reorganized, rearmed, and reclothed, and a new navy is in course of construction. While Austria can put an army of 1,500,000 in the field, there are also available for duty 3 million unorganized men. Serbia has a field army of only about 150,000, with a reserve imperfectly organized of 150,000 more of a total population of 3 million. These figures, however, do not tell the whole story. Serbia belongs to a race of fighters. All the men and nearly all the women know how to shoot and to defend themselves.